Hey everyone and welcome back to the channel. This week we're just going to be talking about everything that I got to see at the 2019 Cinema One Originals Film Festival, which I was very honored to be a part of as a member of its jury, which I guess I'm going to talk about a little bit at the very end. But yeah, so let's just hop right into it. Actually, before anything else, let's talk about one little movie that came out this week as well outside the festival. It's The Annulment, starring Lovie Poe and Joan Bascon. Unfortunately, I wasn't really a fan. I just, in terms of its construction and structure, I didn't quite understand the intent that they had, because it keeps jumping back and forth from past to present, and I didn't really see why that sort of technique was necessary here. Overall, I was really just sort of uncomfortable with how this relationship was sort of defined through erotic scenes and scenes of them arguing and stuff like that. At the end of the film, I just didn't really understand what they saw in each other as a couple, which is always a big problem when it comes to romance films or relationship films. The film's dependence on melodrama, for me, is a real disservice to the very real sort of issues within its core. Because ultimately, this is a movie about class tensions in romantic relationships wherein each partner comes from a different socioeconomic class. And annulment itself is sort of a hotly debated topic in the Philippines along with divorce. So it would have been interesting to sort of, take this kind of subject matter more seriously instead of diving into melodrama and erotic elements, so it just wasn't for me. But anyway, let's talk about the films that came out in competition at the Cinema One Originals Festival. So this is in order of how I watched them. The very first film that I got to watch was the film that we eventually awarded Best Film to, which was Sila-Sila, directed by Giancarlo Abrahan. First of all, the performances in this are incredible. Gio Gahol, Topper Fabregas, but also the more supporting sort of secondary characters played by Fi Palmos, Buga Bunada, Dwayne Baltazar, the great Dwayne Baltazar. But what's really most interesting and memorable about Sila-Sila is the fact that it doesn't really have a real sort of narrative structure. It's very flexible. It just sort of follows Gio Gahol's character as he drifts from one friend group to another, or one lover to another, and we just sort of pick up on little things about these relationships or who he is as a person through these very small interactions, and it feels incredibly real. And I feel like there's a lot of value in that, because the way the film is written and directed, it's not like we're just given a whole bunch of random non-connected parts to contemplate. There is a flow throughout everything, and you get to feel sort of the character histories within every interaction. And when these characters finally sort of change by the end of the movie, the changes feel incredibly earned because they're very small and there's nothing huge or melodramatic about what's going on. There were moments though for me when I feel like this sort of structure and approach to the story kind of got in the way, in the sense that there were some scenes that I felt sort of just hammered home the same point over and over, especially by the end. But still, I really enjoyed this film. I thought it was such an honest and truthful look at relationships and human interaction. And I loved how it focused on the idea that repairing relationships or maintaining friendships requires a lot of very small work. Like, it's not just like you come back into someone's life and suddenly everything is okay. Like, it takes a lot of little conversations to get back to normal again. Next up, we have Tia Madre, which is the sort of requisite horror film that's in this lineup. And unfortunately, I was not a fan. I thought that it depended way too much on your standard sort of horror tropes and tricks, just loud jump scares and, confusing imagery that's like mildly disturbing. But I just felt like all of this stuff really obscured whatever story was there. And, as unhinged as Sherry Hill got to be in this movie, I really didn't understand what the movie was going for. I felt like it was trying to be too ambiguous to the point that it was impossible to sort of figure out how to feel about certain characters. And if that confusion was sort of the point, and if people like that, then sure, I suppose. But as much as I enjoy ambiguity, I also need like something there. I need like a little bit of an anchor to really hook me into a story. But as it was, I just didn't really care about the central relationship here. So yeah. Next up, we have Tayo Muna Habang Hindi Pa Tayo, starring Jane Oineza and JC Santos. This is a movie that I actually kind of enjoyed. I feel like most people didn't like it, but I didn't mind it, really. I do think that it's not perfect. I don't really think it says a whole lot about anything. I feel like it's very preoccupied with its own structure, which also goes back and forth from past to present, although it does that very well. But I still enjoyed it as just like a performance piece. It felt very much like a one-act play. It was great to see Jane Oinez and JC Santos sort of bounce off each other. I did think they had chemistry. I enjoyed the fact that they were able to sort of show both their insecurities and how sort of self-confident they were in themselves. And yeah, I mean, just as a performance piece, I thought it worked. Next up is Utopia, directed by Dustin Celestino. This is the film that we gave the special jury prize to. Speaking personally, like individually, how I viewed this film, I found it very split down the middle. There was stuff in this that I found incredibly entertaining and so funny, especially the parts with Aaron Villaflor, who plays this really polite cop who's trying to do things by the book. I thought he was hilarious. And there are lots of parts in this movie that I feel really would work as maybe like full sketches or full characters in full movies. But at the same time, on the other side of the coin, there are a lot of parts in this movie that I found incredibly frustrating because I felt that the kind of humor they were going for just wasn't working. I felt like the overall satire of the film wasn't very clear either. Like, maybe it's not enough to just say that, oh, the Philippines is so riddled with crime and this is what it's gonna be like in like a few months. And the sort of moral lesson they tried to tack on at the end, I didn't buy. I felt like it didn't fit given all the other things we had already seen in the movie. However, I am in agreement with giving it the jury prize because I think we all agreed that of all the entries, it was the one that was most successful in trying to do something really new and strange and unique. Yeah, so I appreciated it a lot for that, even if it was very hit or miss for me. Next up, we have Lucid, starring Alessandra De Rossi. This is a film that I think is weakest when it depends on its own hook, which is the idea of lucid dreaming, and like there's this whole sort of separate world where you can sort of interact with other lucid dreamers. I feel like that part of the movie was the least developed. By the end of it, I just felt like it was sort of an underdeveloped gimmick that I really wanted to understand a lot more. And by the end of the film, something happens, a character makes a choice that I don't really... Not only do I not agree with it, but I don't think it's very useful for audience members who might be able to relate to this character. I think that if this movie could be re-released with some sort of note at the beginning or at the end, offering like a hotline to people with depression, or just sort of, you know, some sort of supplementary material that guides the discussion about the character's choices, I think that would be a lot more helpful. But as it stands, I do think this is a very good movie. I think it talks about aspects of depression that a lot of movies just sort of gloss over. It really looks at what depression can be like even when you seem to have everything you need to sort of get better. And Alessandra De Rossi in this is incredible. This is some of the best work that I've ever seen her do. And she does very little in terms of actually sort of speaking out. But it's just her face, man. Her face tells like a million stories, and it was just incredible to see it on the big screen. Next, we have Yours Truly, Shirley, starring Regine Velasquez, which is a very strange movie that really wasn't for me. Like, there's definitely an audience out there that will like this type of broad Filipino comedy that, you know, doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but I feel like the film is aware that it doesn't make sense. So there's that. But for me personally, I wasn't a fan of it. I didn't find the humor very funny, not in like an offended sense or whatever. It just wasn't very funny to me. But you know, if they found a way to make this film work, because what this film does is undeniably very interesting. It tries to pair two things that do not belong together at all, which is coping with grief and fandom culture. If they found a way to make that work, it would have been incredible. But for me, they didn't really do it, and the fandom culture stuff sort of overtakes the grief stuff. So I sort of lost the idea that this woman, played by Regine Velasquez, was really trying to cope with something really horrible. And then we have the movie O, which is, O is a really strange little thing. It was pulled out after like the first day to fix some sort of technical stuff. I got to see it maybe a couple days after it got pulled out, but I think some of the technical stuff was really still there, and you know, it was kind of unfixable. But technical stuff aside, I feel like the story that this movie is trying to tell was really just sort of lost in the filmmakers' own heads, in the sense that if I was part of the writing process and the production process, I'm sure whatever was on screen would have made more sense to me. But I feel like as an audience member, I was left to sort of fill in the blanks way too much. There was a lot that just wasn't there, a lot that didn't make logical sense together. And there are things in this movie that I just found kind of gross. And I don't mean that I'm sort of sensitive to blood and sex and whatnot, but the sort of sensitive and borderline exploitative imagery in this movie I found to be kind of tasteless and really didn't really have a place within this movie, I feel. So yeah, it just sort of left me feeling confused and weirded out. And then we have Metamorphosis, directed by J.E. Tiglao, which is probably my personal favorite among the competition films this year. It's not perfect. Like, first of all, I know that the script really kind of boxes itself in. It relies too much on two underdeveloped side characters as the sort of roots of conflict in this movie. But apart from that, like, number one, the performances are so good. We gave Goldazaron the Best Actor award, and he's just stunning in it. Like, I believed him completely as a young boy going through a very turbulent time in his life. But not just him. Iana Bernardes, we also gave supporting actress to. Ricky Dava, Yayo Aguila, they're all so good in this movie. But the thing that really makes this movie for me is the direction from J.E. Tiglao. He manages to turn this boy's sexual awakening into something of a thing of beauty and innocence, and I just can't believe that the MTRCB tried to censor this, because when you watch it, there's really nothing like offensive about it. It's so telling of what that organization values when you watch this movie, because it's so sweet and it's so delicate and it's so valuable to people who exist outside the whole male-female chromosomal binary thing. It was just beautiful to me. There were so many images in this movie that I'm going to remember forever. I loved it. Yeah. Now let's move on to some of the other international films that I was able to see at the festival. So first of all, we have The Father, which is, I believe, a Russian film that I really enjoyed, even if I feel like a lot of people in Letterboxd don't like it. And I understand why, but I guess I just found a lot of enjoyment in just how small and strange this movie was, how it threw these characters into increasingly absurd situations that only really reflected how the characters were just unwilling to take accountability for anything, and they just kept pushing things and made things so much more uncomfortable for themselves just because of their own pride and ego and whatever. I enjoyed that. And the lead actors, Ivan Barnev and Ivan Sanov, I believe, they're just excellent at being deadpan. Like, no matter how crazy the situation is, they're just playing it completely straight, and I love that. But next up is a movie that I cannot wait for the rest of you to see. There was a special invite-only screening, unfortunately, of Knives Out, written and directed by Rian Johnson. This was such a fun movie, dude. Like, I cannot wait for people to see this, and I cannot wait to be in that audience again to see people react. I haven't seen people react this strongly to a movie throughout the entire movie since, like, Bad Genius a couple of years ago. It's so good, man. This thing is like 130 minutes long, but it's constructed and edited so well that it never slows down. Like, I was hooked from beginning to end, never checked the time. It just kept building and kept getting better. Rian Johnson, like, I'm so happy to say, again, is one of the most talented storytellers working today, especially in film. The way he can nail both gut-wrenching tension and different styles of comedy is just insane to me. And I know a lot of people are gonna be walking into this movie thinking that, oh, this guy made The Last Jedi and I didn't like The Last Jedi, so I'm somehow morally obliged to dislike whatever he puts out next. But, why would you ruin that experience for yourself? Like, just go into this knowing that it's gonna be a great movie and enjoy it, man. It's fine. But what impressed me the most about Knives Out is that I think it's an incredible piece of writing as well. The story goes in places that I just did not expect at all. If you've seen the trailers, you still don't really know anything about what this movie is actually about. And by the end of it, it's turned into something that's just so much bigger than you thought it was going to be. And it's just so satisfying. I don't want to say anything about this movie, just please go see it. It's so much fun. You're gonna love it, I hope. Please check it out. Now let's talk about The Two Popes, starring Anthony Hopkins and Jonathan Pryce. This is based on a play, and it's about Pope Benedict XVI and the future Pope Francis. And what I loved about this movie is that number one, Anthony Hopkins and Jonathan Pryce, of course, not only do they look exactly like the respective characters, but I feel like they really capture these characters on an emotional, spiritual level, you know? Like, I completely bought the fact that they were who they were. Their interactions together are hilarious and heartbreaking and just, you know, completely real. And it's exactly what you want to see from two huge actors at the top of their game. But I was really, really surprised just how much I enjoyed this movie, and I enjoyed the writing of it so much. It really is a movie about sort of Christian values, but it doesn't preach at all and it doesn't come off like that. It really is a story about people sort of learning to accept things that they can't change, and people learning to atone for whatever they did in the past for the sake of their fellow man. And I think that's really beautiful. And it's honestly like maybe the best Christian film we've gotten in God knows how long, because it isn't trying to be a Christian film. It's just a human drama between two people, and I loved it. But if there's one movie from the festival that really stood out head and shoulders above the rest, it was absolutely Portrait of a Lady on Fire, directed by Sila-Sila. This is a romance film between two women. Marianne, played by Noemi Merlant, if I'm getting her name correctly, is a painter who is sort of brought onto this remote island to paint the portrait of another woman, Heloise, played by Adele Haenel. And once she gets this portrait painted, Heloise is going to be married off to another man. And we just get to see the relationship grow, and it is the most exquisite thing that I've seen in a cinema in God knows how long. It's so good. It's one of the best films, maybe of the decade as well. First of all, this entire movie looks absolutely stunning. Like, every single frame is lit and shot and composed in such a way as to make the film look like a giant Baroque painting come to life. But, you know, it's not just an aesthetic thing. I think it adds to the storytelling as well, because as we see Marianne go through this process of painting this other woman, we begin to understand the world and how it looks through her eyes, and everything seems to become process. You know, we become privy to her creative process and her trying to understand this other person. And so much of that is reflected through Celine Sciamma's direction, and she really takes her time in tracing sort of the eye line of her characters. You know, there are so many scenes where it just sort of fixates on someone's hands or someone's ear or something like that. And you know, she really keeps her camera on these little details to help us sort of understand what's going through Marianne's head. Being allowed to sort of inhabit that point of view is such a great technique, because by the end of the movie, you feel so involved in these characters' relationship. It doesn't feel like Celine Sciamma is trying to sell us the relationship in any way. It's not like a cookie cutter sort of Hollywood romance where we're just supposed to accept that these two people love each other or whatever. Here, the relationship feels completely organic because we've been able to get to know each woman so intimately. And of course, a large part of that has to do with the performances by these two women, who are just absolutely stunning and incredible. There's a lot of curiosity to their interactions. I think that's the key word. Like, they're both trying to figure the other one out, but at the same time, they're also projecting stuff onto the other, which is really great to see. And the way they sort of discuss the relationship and there's just their outlooks on everything is done in like the most poetic way imaginable. The script for this movie is just so elegant. It really goes the extra mile in terms of detailing this relationship, because this isn't just a movie about two women falling in love. It's a movie really that interrogates the act of seeing. You know, what does it mean to really see and understand somebody else? And for this movie, it defines seeing as also allowing oneself to be seen, allowing oneself to be vulnerable, and sort of coordinating your own perceptions of each other in order to reach a common understanding. And, you know, seeing as an act with intent. It's not just passively observing another person. It's really allowing yourself to be seen and seeing someone else so that you can create something greater than both of yourselves. I mean, it's very philosophical, but I think that the way that it's done is accessible for anyone who has the patience. And by the end of it, it's incredibly emotional. The very ending is just a huge gut punch, and it's so satisfying. I know it's gonna get like no love at like the Oscars or whatever, but who cares? It's one of the best movies of the year. Please go out and see it if you have the chance. Finally, before I end this video, I just want to leave a quick note about my being in the jury at the Cinnamon Originals Festival. I was with Miss Sari Delena, with Laf Diaz, Paolo Avellino, and Park Sung-hyo, who programs the Busan International Film Festival, among other things. And, you know, the question is, and I'm sure, like, there are some people who've asked this, especially, like, on Twitter I've seen, but there are a lot of people asking, like, why the hell is this kid, like, with these people? And my reaction is, same, like, I don't know. I never feel like I deserve it. I still don't feel like I deserve it. But I know, what I do know is that I have immense respect for my co-jurors. I have huge respect for Sir Ronald Arguelles. And I know that when this sort of opportunity is given to me, like, I really just want to do my part and help them, you know, make the best out of the festival. So, you know, while I don't feel like I, you know, deserve this at all, like, of course I'd want to help. Of course I'd want to take the opportunity. So, you know, I also don't know what I'm doing here. My imposter syndrome is at, like, an all-time high. But the only thing I can be is grateful to these people. It's just been such an honor. It's been such a learning experience for me, and I've treasured every moment of it. I know that when stuff like this happens, I can't just sort of take it as a win and, you know, use it to boast or whatever. It's a wake-up call for me to sort of keep putting in the work and to work harder than ever. This is not a sign that I can now be complacent or whatever. It's just completely the opposite. So yeah, I'm just very thankful and happy that I was able to help out in whatever capacity for this festival, and I really, you know, am excited for the future. So yeah, thank you guys for being here. Thank you guys for watching. If you have any thoughts about anything that happened in this video or anything I talked about, please do leave me a comment and let's have a conversation.